thank you all for coming, although I know a lot of you here are, you know, you have to be here because you're trying to get credit.
Voluntold.
You're voluntold, that's right. Or you're here because your class sent you here for the night. This is our workshop on domestic violence or intimate partner violence. We may use it interchangeably in this workshop. I'm Lisa Bostaph, it's a big long name. I'm Lisa Bostaph, and I teach in the Department of Criminal Justice here at Boise State.
And I'm Jennifer Landheis. I also sort of teach in the Department of Criminal Justice.
She does teach in the Department of Criminal Justice.
And I'm also the Director of Social Change at the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence. So we're going to start with a little bit about the statistics about domestic violence, just so you guys have a pretty good grounding. I'm hoping most of you already do, so that this isn't a 101. This is more like a 303 or a 404. But a little bit about the statistics. Number one, that about a third of all murdered females are killed by an intimate partner. That's nationwide. We know that as far as reporting to law enforcement goes, in 2010, we also know that victims of intimate partner violence are 4 times more likely to be females than males. Okay, so before anybody jumps us and says that we're man haters when we refer to a victim as a female and a perpetrator as a male, that's why we do, because the statistics will show you over and over again that many times perpetrators are males and victims are females. That's not to say it doesn't happen in same-sex relationships. That's not to say men can't be victims of domestic violence. So nobody write that on your evaluations, okay? Also, we know that in 2013, there were about 5,700 reports to law enforcement in the state of Idaho regarding domestic violence. But if the statistics are that it's approximately every 12 seconds that 1 in 4 women will be a victim of intimate partner violence, why do we only have 5,700 reports to law enforcement?
Non-reported.
What's that?
Non-reported.
Okay, it's not reported. Why? Somebody said fear of?
Partner.
What?
The partner.
Their partner. What else?
Just the fact that you gotta live with them, so you gotta try to keep status quo, keep things as quiet and as calm as possible.
Okay.
Distrust of the system.
Distrust of the system. What would you distrust of the system? Because the system's perfect.
Cops are going to be able to do anything, and the prosecutors are going to be able to do anything.
Okay.
Thanks for that conflict perspective.
Yes. What else?
Victim blaming.
Victim blaming. Tell me more.
It's just, you know, why didn't she leave him instead of saying, why is he beating you? If it was a male to female
Right.
relationship.
Yep. What else?
Shame and guilt.
Shame and guilt. Okay. Other things?
Isolation.
Isolation. So I'm hearing that if you suddenly report to law enforcement that the magic wand doesn't just get waved and everything gets better and the relationship is fixed. But somehow people sometimes think that happens. Would that be correct? Yeah. Okay.
What do you think the percentage is nationally for domestic violence reporting to law enforcement? Just yell out a number.
12%.
12?
Higher. Higher.
55.
Lower.
51.
Lower.
45%.
50%. You're all kind of like hovering around there. 50% nationwide.
So you're close. We put up the Idaho statute about domestic violence. There's not going to be a test on this one later, but it's for your reference. Anything in particular stand out to you when you read that? I'm not going to stand in front of it because that makes it difficult to read. Yes?
The thing I noticed is just that it's limited to, I think, spouse, former spouse, cohabitants, or maybe not. I know in Idaho the regular statute is limited to certain victim-offender relationships.
Okay.
But it looks like this one is a little bit more extensive. It might be the one used for CPUs.
It has to be coercive.
I would see the word pattern.
Okay. And that's one of the things that we'll actually use when we talk about domestic violence is that it has to be a pattern of behavior. So that's going to differentiate it from like a situational perspective, is in that it's a pattern of behavior. So it's the things that happen over and over and over again. So when we talk about later the power and control wheel, there isn't a single person in this room who can say they have never used any of those behaviors on the power and control wheel. And if you tell me that, you're a liar, because all of us have used those things. But it's about whether we use it in a pattern of behavior to dominate and control somebody else. So great pick on that one. Anything else?
I'm surprised that it doesn't say anything about like emotional abuse.
Okay.
It talks about like threatening, but I just am a little surprised that it's focused on physical and agree with that code.
And we kind of tricked you because this is the criminal definition, so it's not like law enforcement can arrest on emotional violence, right? But so we're going to have the criminal definition, which is one thing, and then we're going to have like the theoretical and practitioner perspective of what we all can agree is domestic violence, not necessarily are those things that can be arrestable offenses. Does that make sense? So today we're going to talk about a little bit of both and what can be criminal and what is actually, to the rest of us, an understanding what domestic violence is. Does that make sense to everybody? Anything else you want to add, Lisa?
No.
All right. How many of you have seen this wheel before? Good.
Very good.
Okay. This is one of the keys to understanding domestic violence. What you also need to know is that this wheel in particular was based on white, heterosexual, middle-class women's experience. So while this one is...
In Duluth, Minnesota.
Yeah, in Duluth, Minnesota. So not exactly a culturally diverse area. Sorry, it's not. Okay, I'm from Iowa, it's almost the same thing. Okay, so what you need to know is there are different power and control wheels for different relationships. So there are power and control wheels for LGBT relationships, there are power and control wheels if you have a child who's the primary victim, there are power and control wheels for immigrant relationships, there's all sorts of different power and control wheels. So one of the things that I would highly caution you is if you ever use this in any type of situation, don't try to just adapt this one to fit the situation you are in. So I've had lots of advocates across the state who will use this and be working with a victim who's in a same-sex relationship and then just try to adapt it to make it work. Well, if you're a lesbian couple and you're using this one, we've adapted to say use privilege, but it usually says use male privilege. Then you're using an example that's not going to work, right? So there are specific power and control wheels out there. But one of the things I want to do is take you through some of these, and then Lisa can chime in with some of the examples that she's seen, but I want to show you how I've seen it. So a little bit about me, before I came to work at the coalition, I spent 14 years doing direct services as a victim advocate in rural Nebraska. So I had a 5-county area and I worked with victims of domestic violence and sexual assault and stalking prior to coming to the coalition and doing what I do now as a coalition. So at the coalition, my primary job is to help advocates and law enforcement and pretty much everybody in the criminal justice system do their job better. So how to identify it, how to increase their capacity to be able to do this. So, and I know Lisa has direct victim experience as well. So when we describe some of these things, we can give you some examples. So for instance, it can be things like using economic abuse, which the first thing that pops into a lot of people's head is a typical scenario where the perpetrator controls all the money and the victim has no access to resources. What can happen is the opposite, where the victim's supporting the family and works 2 or 3 jobs because the perpetrator won't work and refuses to work. So that is a little bit odd for some people because they say, well, then why wouldn't a victim just leave if they control all the finances? We'll talk about that in a little bit, okay? But economic abuse happens quite frequently. I always say if I had a money tree growing in my backyard, that we would be able to help a lot more victims of domestic violence because it takes a lot of resources to be able to relocate, to be able to start your life over. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. Coercion and threats is something that perpetrators are extremely good at. So they will find the thing that means the most to the victim and manipulate that. So if that's her children, it'll be things like, I'm going to take your kids and you're never going to see them again. So in this state, if I am married to my husband and we don't have any type of custody established, and we get in a fight and I go home tonight and my husband has taken my 2 daughters and crossed state lines with them and sends me a text message and basically is like, too bad I took the girls, you're never going to see them again. What can I do about that?
In this state, I don't think you can do much about it.
Not much criminally, right? Because if I called law enforcement, they would tell me what?
He's got custody, right?
Yeah, we both have, there's no custody established, so he hasn't broken any laws that way. Can I go to an attorney and try to establish custody and go that route? Absolutely. But if I don't have the kids in my possession, or am I already in trouble? It can be an uphill battle for that, okay? So perpetrators will threaten a victim with the things that are most important to them. So it can be things like kids, but it also can be things like reputation. So if they live in a small community or they are both together on a college campus like this and they say things like, I'm going to ruin your reputation. I'm going to tell everybody that you X, Y, and Z. So how fast does a rumor spread here? If we start one now, the whole campus will know by the time we get done with this class, right? Okay.
Or at least the Department of Criminal Justice.
Yes. It might hit Yik Yak. You never know. We might be that popular. So it's going to spread really quickly, right? And especially in small towns. So if we have a victim whose reputation may be tarnished by something that the perpetrator's threatening, those coercion and threats can be very significant to her. And you know that the person that you are in an intimate partner relationship with you is the person that knows your deepest and darkest secrets. And so that's something that's very real for a victim. Never mind that we've now stepped into the world of social media. So what we see happen in a lot of this piece, and this piece is what we call revenge porn, which is where perpetrators will take pictures that they consensually took together and then suddenly put them on the internet and tag her in them, and now they're up and out for everybody to see. And it's really difficult to get those taken down. So we see that as a tactic that's used very frequently now. Intimidation, for lots of victims, they will tell you that's a certain look or a certain gesture.
Now, if, for example, if you've had a battering relationship going on, intimidation doesn't have to be that extreme, right? So if Jennifer and I are in a relationship and I have, which, believe me, she'd kick my butt, but if I had beaten her on numerous occasions, me coming up to her and just doing this could be vastly more intimidating than it would be to anybody else. Right? Especially if I've choked her, or if I've taken her by the neck and slammed her head into a wall, or if I've taken her and dragged her this way. Just the act of walking up in any public area and putting my hand on the back of her neck sends a message, and that's being really intimidating. Or getting in her face, invading her space, and yelling. I don't even have to lay hands on her, but that's an intimidating action because of what has happened in that relationship.
And think about the criminal justice process. When we have victims have to go to court, they show up, and it's the perpetrator's right to show up at all those hearings, right? And they don't even have to say anything or look at the victim or do anything, but just their mere presence there is an intimidation factor for the victim. So many victims will back out of that court process just merely by the fact that the perpetrator is going to have to be involved in that process. And it's extremely scary for them. And think about how secure are our courthouses. I mean, they're better now since 9/11, but I remember as a victim advocate going to the courthouses all the time and having perpetrators threaten me in the middle of the courthouse that they were going to beat me up, that they were going to kill me, because there was absolutely no protection. There may have been a deputy inside the courtroom, but the elevator up and the hallway down to the courtroom, there was nobody, let alone the parking lot.
The parking lot's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. The emotional abuse, I remember my biggest lesson with this one was I had graduated from college. I was going to save the world. I was a green social worker. Like, everything was going to be fantastic. And I was probably a week into the job, and I was sitting across from a victim, and we're safety planning and talking about some of our options. And she looks at me and she goes, "You don't know shit, do you?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "You keep concentrating on this." And she points to her black eye. And she goes, "Fix this, and you can get me out of this relationship." And I kind of sat there for a few minutes because I was like, I didn't know what to say to her. Because I was concentrating on all the physical factors to her safety, like, could we put her in shelter? Could we get a protection order? Could we do all these other things? And what she wanted me to fix was the fact that her self-esteem was broken, that she felt like she didn't have any options, that he had control of every single part of her life. And I didn't have an easy fix for that. And so many times what I see across our system, even with victim advocates, is they have this toolbox of things that they try to use to fix things. And they open up their advocacy toolbox and everything is focused on physical safety. And nothing is focused on emotional and psychological safety. Nothing. And that's as far as they can get. So when you talk about safety plan, they want to pull out a piece of paper that says, bring your driver's license and make sure you have a bag packed in the back of your car. That's not a safety plan, okay? Isolation can happen in a couple of different ways. That can be making sure that the victim has no resources, so no financial resources, no access to friends and family. So either that can be that he's such a jerk in front of everybody else that friends and family say, I don't want to be a part of this, or he'll cause problems and the victim may say, I don't want to be in contact with my family, because of a perpetrator who will up and leave for a couple of days and take their only vehicle, and the victim will have no phone, no access to food. She may or may not have her children with her, and they'll just leave. And so we have somebody out in the middle of nowhere who has absolutely no access to resources. And then he may pull the trick of calling CPS and saying, hey, there's no food in the house, why don't you go check on her? And Child Protective Services shows up, and there's no resources, and there's no food, and there's no access, and then suddenly the system gets involved and takes away their children. Big intimidation factor? Absolutely.
And also in terms of isolation, during this week especially, but throughout the year, I have so many people who come in and talk to me or go downstairs during Victims' Rights Week and talk to me because they have a friend or a family member who's in an abusive relationship and they don't know how to help. One of the things how you play into isolation is a lot of people who have friends or family members who are in abusive relationships get tired of the fact that they won't leave. Until you decide to leave, don't call me. You know what you've just done? You played right into that abuser's hand because that's what they want you to do. And now you may have been that person's 1, 2, 3 person lifeline. That when they finally are able to get out, whether they have the resources, whether they're so afraid that the fear is overriding any other concern that they have, or now their children are being harmed, and so they're going to get out on behalf of their children, they won't call you because you were not there to support them. And you essentially said, until you get your shit together, I'm not going to help you. And that's exactly what the abuser wants you to do. So if you want to be supportive, that's not the way to be supportive. The way to be supportive is to get educated and understand what's going on and let them know that you are there when they're ready. And that you're not going to judge, but you will be there when they're ready. And that's how you're supportive. But putting limitations or justifications or excuses on your support makes you really no different than the batterer that they're living with.
It's an excellent example, because a lot of times the perpetrator will then say to the victim, see, I told you your friends weren't really your friends, and they're going to bail on you. And I've never bailed on you, I'm right here. Great one. Denying, blaming, and minimizing. I have a theory that there is a book in the jail that says when you get arrested, these are the things that you should say. That you should say the victim made you do it, that they pushed your buttons, that you lost control, and that you promise you'll never do it again. And then when you call your victim, even though you're not supposed to, but you will from the jail, that when you call your victim, you should make sure that you promise that you're going to go get counseling, that you're going to not do drugs and alcohol anymore, and that you've found Jesus, who, by the way, lives in jail, is my other theory. Because they all find him when they go to jail.
Or prison.
Or prison.
Because I see them,
yes.
I see he's in prison.
But they leave him there when they leave jail, right? So my theory is he lives in jail. I'm going to test it sometime. Somebody write a research proposal on that one. Okay. Because they all have called and said, I've stopped drinking, I've found Jesus. I love that I've stopped drinking. I'm like, well, you've been incarcerated for the last 24 hours. Like, that's not really tough, right? But then they all come to, I had the pleasure of facilitating a batterers intervention program, which we'll talk about how successful those are, for 2 years of my life. And then I was the person who supervised the people who ran the batterers intervention program. And that was really tough because we had a male and female facilitator, which is best practice. And I would find a facilitator and they would come in and they'd be like, I'm so strong on this. No, I'm gonna see through everybody's bullshit. Nobody can manipulate me. I totally have this. And I would hire them, and they'd start in batterers intervention group as a facilitator. And then like a month and a half later, they would come to me and they would say, so do you know about Sarah's drinking problem? Because Adam says that she's been drinking a lot again lately, and I'm really afraid that her drinking is going to cause him to do something and he's going to get thrown out of this group because sure, her drinking's really bad. And I'd be like, what the? You don't see that this is part of the manipulation that he's doing with you to help set up for the next time that he's gonna batter her and violate his probation? And they'd be like, no, she's a little off. She has a drinking problem. And they would totally buy into what the perpetrator was telling them because they're that good at it. They were so good at manipulating that they would convince even these skilled facilitators that that is exactly what's happening. And I see it play out all the time in DV court. Judges and advocates and prosecutors who buy into the, oh, I've changed my life thing. Well, that's pretty easy to do when you have the entire system devoting all their resources and watching your every move for 6 months, okay?